On the pristine white marble steps, an extraordinary moment changed everything. A wealthy man, immaculate in his elegant suit, bent down to touch the tiny face of a newborn lying in a simple wicker basket. His eyes were filled with astonishment mixed with an indescribable tremor. Just a few steps away, a maid stood frozen, her hands clasped together as if in prayer, her gaze carrying both worry and hope. Neither of them knew that this very moment would open the door to a journey of redemption and the rediscovery of family's true meaning. Before we begin, let me send you and your loved ones wishes of peace, good health, and the simple joys of everyday life. And I would truly love to know, what country are you listening from? And what time of day is it there? Sterling Holloway always began his mornings at an hour when most of Stillwater, New Hampshire was still wrapped in sleep. In the crisp chill of early October, he left the cedar-sided house at the end of Maple Lane, the porch light casting a pale glow on fallen leaves that painted the driveway in reds and golds. At 52, Sterling carried himself with the precision of a Swiss watch. A mug of black coffee, the folded financial section of the Boston Globe, and his silver Lincoln gliding down quiet streets toward his architectural firm on Main. To anyone looking from the outside, his life seemed ordered, even enviable. Yet to those who knew him, few as they were, it looked cold, stripped of warmth and family ties. Years of success had carved Sterling into a man both respected and feared. Once married, he had lived with dreams of raising children in that same cedar house. But tragedy had stolen his wife in a car accident long ago. Since then, he had buried himself in work, convinced that blueprints and contracts could fill the silence left behind. He still showed up to church on Sundays, sharp suit pressed, silver hair combed, nodding politely to the congregation. But he never lingered afterward. Dinners were usually a medium-rare steak at Murphy's Diner, always ordered with the same measured tone, accompanied by the day's financials folded neatly at his elbow. This was how Sterling liked it. Controlled, predictable, untouchable. The town knew him as Mr. Holloway, the man who had designed the new library, the courthouse renovation, the lakeside condos that brought tourists each summer. Children waved when he passed, though he rarely waved back, distracted by thoughts of deadlines and drafts. He was a man of stone pillars and glass towers, of measurements and margins. Yet even stone, under the right pressure, can crack. That morning, the sun had barely crested the horizon, painting the rooftops of Stillwater in a soft pink light. Sterling locked the door, coat collar raised against the chill, briefcase in one hand, keys in the other. He was halfway down the porch steps when he noticed something unusual at the edge of the walkway. A small figure, huddled against the cold, sat on the top step as though waiting. The boy could not have been more than 7. His jacket was thin, a faded navy windbreaker that had seen better days, and his jeans were frayed at the knees. Brown hair stuck out in tufts, and his sneakers looked one size too big. Sterling stopped, the air catching in his chest. "What in the world?" he muttered under his breath. The child stirred at the sound, lifting his head slowly. Wide hazel eyes blinked at him, cautious but steady. For a long moment, they just stared at one another, the wealthy architect in his pressed wool coat and the boy shivering on his step like a stray cat. "Sir?" the boy finally said, his voice a little hoarse, as though he hadn't spoken for hours. Are you Mr. Holloway?" Sterling's grip tightened on the briefcase. "Yes, I am." His tone came out sharper than intended, and he tried again, softer this time. "Yes, I'm Sterling Holloway. Who are you, son?" The boy looked down at his hands, twisting his fingers. "My name's Ethan." His voice cracked on the second syllable, but then he said something that froze Sterling in place. "My mom said you might be my dad." The morning sounds of Stillwater, the rustle of leaves, the chirp of sparrows seemed to vanish. Sterling blinked, certain he had misheard. "What did you just say?" Ethan swallowed, his small shoulders trembling. "She told me, if I ever got lost, if I ever needed help, I should find you. She said you'd know me. She said—" He hesitated, then whispered, "She said you're my father." Sterling felt as though the ground had tilted beneath him. Him? A father? He had no children, at least none he knew of. He looked at the boy again, at the stubborn chin, the determined gaze that somehow felt familiar. "Where's your mother?" Sterling asked, his voice low, controlled. Ethan shook his head. "She told me to wait here. She said she had to go, but that you'd take care of me." The boy's words were simple, but each one cut deep, as if carving through the armor Sterling had built for years. The man who had built a life of order now stood at the edge of chaos. He never expected a child at his doorstep, claiming blood ties that could unravel everything he thought he knew. Sterling set the briefcase down on the porch rail, his mind racing. "Ethan, is that right?" he asked carefully. The boy nodded. "Do you have somewhere else you're supposed to be? School? A relative's house?" Ethan hugged his knees tighter. "Mom said you'd ask that. She said not to be scared. She told me you were a good man, even if you didn't know me yet." His words trembled with both hope and exhaustion. Sterling felt the weight of them pressing into his chest. Good man? He hadn't been called that in years, not sincerely. He was efficient, successful, reliable, but a good man? That title belonged to someone warmer, more open, the kind of person Sterling hadn't been since his wife's accident. He opened the door and gestured inside. "It's cold. Come in for a moment." Ethan hesitated, then shuffled forward. The boy's sneakers squeaked on the hardwood, leaving faint marks of dirt and damp. Sterling winced. His home was immaculate, but something about the small sound filled the silence in a way he hadn't realized he needed. The entry smelled faintly of cedar polish and last night's coffee. Ethan looked around wide-eyed at the tall ceilings, the framed blueprints on the walls, the staircase with its polished banister. "It's big," he whispered. Sterling cleared his throat. "Sit here," he said, pulling a chair out at the kitchen table. He poured a glass of orange juice, the only thing besides coffee in the fridge that seemed child-appropriate. Ethan drank greedily, wiping his mouth with his sleeve before Sterling handed him a napkin. The boy smiled faintly, a flash of warmth that disarmed the man completely. "So your mother," Sterling began. "What's her name?" Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "Marissa. She said you'd remember her." The name struck like a hammer against old stone. Marissa. A face flickered in his memory. Brown eyes, a laugh from decades ago. A summer fling when he was younger and less guarded. Could it be? He shook the thought away. Too many years had passed. But why would the boy say that name unless... Sterling rubbed his temples. And where is she now? Ethan's eyes dropped to the table. "She said she'd come back, but she didn't say when." The room fell silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator. Sterling studied the boy, his posture, his eyes. There was something hauntingly familiar in the way Ethan tilted his head, the way he chewed at his bottom lip when nervous. Memories tugged at Sterling, memories he had locked away. "You understand, this is complicated," Sterling said slowly. Ethan nodded. "I know, but I had a dream last night." He glanced up, hesitant. "I dreamed you were my dad. You came to my baseball game, and you clapped louder than anybody." Sterling's throat tightened. He had never been one for dreams too impractical, but the innocence in Ethan's words pierced through every wall he had built. For the first time in years, he felt something stir that was not tied to deadlines or balance sheets. Before he could respond, a knock echoed from the back door. Sterling stiffened. Few people ever came uninvited. He rose, crossing the tiled floor. When he opened the door, Dorothy, his elderly neighbor, stood there with a basket of muffins wrapped in a checkered cloth. "Morning, Sterling," she said brightly, then peered past him. "Oh my, who's this young man?" Ethan shrank back, but Dorothy smiled warmly. "Well, aren't you a handsome one? I'm Dorothy from next door." Sterling's mouth went dry. "This is Ethan," he managed. Dorothy tilted her head knowingly. Years had made her wise at reading silences. She pressed the basket into Sterling's hands. "Looks like you've got company. Maybe the Lord's sending you a surprise." Ethan smiled shyly at her, and for a moment, Sterling saw something he hadn't seen in his home in a very long time life, unfiltered and unmeasured. As Dorothy left, Sterling turned back to the boy. Ethan's gaze was steady now, filled with an odd mix of fear and trust. "You believe me, don't you?" Ethan asked softly. Sterling wanted to say no, to protect his world from unraveling. But when he looked at the boy at the reflection of features, he could not deny words failed him. He pressed a hand against the back of the chair for balance, his pulse quickening. The life he had lived so carefully, so tightly controlled, had just been cracked open by a child's simple claim. And Sterling Holloway, a man who had spent years avoiding surprises, now faced the one surprise that could change everything. The following morning brought a pale light over Stillwater, the kind that softened the edges of the rooftops and made the lake shimmer like glass. Sterling had slept little, tossing and turning with the memory of Ethan's words echoing in his ears. When dawn finally came, he gave up on rest altogether and moved downstairs, only to find the boy curled on the couch, tucked beneath one of Sterling's wool blankets as though he had always belonged there. For a moment, Sterling simply stood in the doorway, coffee steaming in his hand. The boy's chest rose and fell steadily, his hair messy, one arm dangling off the side of the couch. It was the kind of scene Sterling would normally glance past without a second thought. Yet now it held him rooted to the floor, a reminder that his house no longer echoed with silence. Ethan stirred at the smell of coffee. "Morning," he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. "Morning," Sterling replied. His voice came out rougher than he intended. "Did you sleep all right?" Ethan nodded. "Better than most nights." He hesitated, then added, "It was warm here." Sterling set his mug down on the counter and cleared his throat. "You'll need breakfast. Come on." He moved through the motions of frying eggs and bacon, something he rarely did for himself. Ethan watched with interest, perched on a stool at the counter. It wasn't long before the boy blurted out, "You don't cook much, do you?" Sterling gave a short laugh. "Not often. Usually it's diner food. But I suppose I can manage scrambled eggs." They ate in silence at first, but Sterling noticed how Ethan glanced at the photos on the wall, old snapshots of buildings Sterling had designed, awards in polished frames, and a single wedding picture half hidden behind the others. Ethan's gaze lingered there, though he said nothing. After breakfast, Sterling tried to frame the conversation carefully. "Ethan, I need to know more about your mother. Where did she go after leaving you here?" The boy fidgeted with his fork. "She said she had to fix something. She promised she'd come back." His voice faltered, as though he wanted to believe it, but wasn't sure he could. Sterling leaned back in his chair, studying him. Every answer only deepened the questions. If Marissa truly was the same woman from his past, why would she send her child here now? And why keep silent for so many years? He decided to call the office to cancel his morning meetings. His assistant, startled by his abrupt change, asked if he was ill. "Just a personal matter," Sterling muttered before hanging up. For once, the work could wait. Later that day, while walking Ethan into town, Sterling noticed how naturally the boy greeted strangers. At the bakery, he thanked the cashier without prompting. At the hardware store, he asked questions about tools as though fascinated by how things were built. There was a gentleness to him that Sterling found disarming an openness the man himself had long since lost. It was near the post office that Sterling first sensed they were being watched. Across the street, a woman lingered by the lamppost, her coat collar pulled high, auburn hair glinting in the autumn Sunday. Her eyes locked on Ethan with an intensity that made Sterling pause mid-step. The boy followed his gaze and frowned. "That's her," he whispered. Sterling's pulse kicked up. "Your mother?" Ethan nodded, his small hand tightening around Sterling's sleeve. "That's Marissa. The woman seemed to realize she'd been spotted. She turned quickly, disappearing down Maple Street before Sterling could call out. Sterling's first instinct was to run after her, but Ethan's grip on his sleeve held him back. The boy's hand was small yet trembling with the kind of fear that told Sterling this moment had repeated itself before someone appearing, then vanishing again. He crouched down to meet the boy's eyes. "It's all right. We'll see her again. I promise." He didn't know if the words were true, but Ethan seemed to steady at the reassurance. They continued down the street, Sterling forcing himself to maintain composure. Inside, however, his mind whirled with questions. Marissa. The name had returned, no longer a memory from youth, but a flesh and blood presence just blocks away. If she was truly Ethan's mother, what had happened to her life? And why send the boy to him after all these years? Back at the house, Dorothy Hanley dropped by, carrying another basket, this time filled with jars of apple butter she had canned herself. "You'll need something sweet on your toast," she said cheerfully. Her gaze flicked from Sterling to Ethan, and she caught the tension in the room. "Children have a way of uncovering what's been buried, Sterling. Don't waste the gift." With that cryptic remark, she left him to stew in his thoughts. That night, after Ethan had fallen asleep, Sterling poured himself a glass of wine and sat by the fireplace. The boy's jacket hung neatly over a chair, seemed almost like a silent witness. He tried to imagine what it must feel like to be 7 years old and left on the doorstep of a stranger. And yet Ethan had walked into his kitchen with a trust that unsettled him more than suspicion ever could. Perhaps the boy saw something in him that Sterling no longer recognized in himself. The following day brought another test. Sterling had promised Ethan a trip to Murphy's Diner for pancakes, something the boy had never stopped talking about since glimpsing the sign in town. When they arrived, the waitress, Gloria, raised her brows at the sight of Sterling with a child. "Well, would you look at that?" she said, setting down menus. "Didn't know you had family visiting." Ethan piped up before Sterling could answer. "He's my dad." The words drew a ripple of surprise through the booth. Sterling's jaw tightened. He considered correcting the boy, clarifying, setting boundaries. Yet when he looked into Ethan's eager face, he found himself swallowing the protest. "Coffee, please," he told Gloria instead. "And orange juice for him." Breakfast was noisy with clinking dishes and children laughing at other tables. Ethan devoured his pancakes, sticky with syrup, then leaned across the booth and asked, "Can we come back again, Dad?" The words struck Sterling like a hammer, both painful and unexpectedly welcome. He managed a nod. Outside the diner, a shadow lingered across the street. Marissa again, half hidden beneath a wool hat. Sterling caught her eye this time. For a split second, she looked ready to cross toward them. But just as quickly, she turned, disappearing into the Saturday crowd. He clenched his fists. He wanted answers, needed them, but chasing her in front of Ethan felt wrong. Instead, he placed a steadying hand on the boy's shoulder. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's head home." That night, as Sterling tucked the blanket around Ethan on the couch, the boy looked up sleepily and murmured, "You'll be here in the morning, right?" Sterling hesitated before answering, "Yes, I'll be here." When he turned off the lamp, the house was no longer silent. The faint rhythm of Ethan's breathing filled the spaces where emptiness had lived for too long. For Sterling Holloway, a man who had prided himself on order and solitude, the arrival of this boy and the ghost of the woman who had once held his heart was pulling him into a storm of questions he could no longer avoid. The weeks that followed began to settle into an unexpected rhythm. Sterling rearranged his days, meetings shifted, deadlines postponed because there was suddenly someone else in the house who needed more than contracts and blueprints. Ethan's presence, though small in stature, filled the Cedar home with a kind of noise Sterling hadn't realized he missed. The patter of sneakers on hardwood, the rattle of cereal bowls in the sink, the simple chatter of a boy discovering the world. On Saturday mornings, they walked into town together. At the farmer's market, Ethan asked endless questions about the vegetables, about how honey was made, about why the old clock tower still chimed at noon. Sterling, once a man of efficient silence, found himself answering patiently. Surprised at his own willingness to explain, he even bought Ethan a jar of honeycomb, watching the boy's delight as he tasted it for the first time. Neighbors noticed, Dorothy Hanley especially. She often called out from her porch, "That boy's bright as a button, Sterling. Don't let him slip away." Sterling would wave stiffly, but her words lingered long after they walked on. Despite the new rhythm, the shadow of Marissa hovered. Sterling often caught himself scanning crowds, certain he'd glimpse her auburn hair again. When he asked Ethan about her, the boy offered little more than what he'd already said. She promised she'd return. It was enough to both comfort and torment him. One afternoon, Sterling took Ethan to the library, a building he himself had designed years before. Its arched windows and quiet reading rooms had always been a point of pride, though he rarely visited once the project was complete. Now, sitting at a corner table, he watched Ethan devour picture books and early readers with a hunger that reminded him of his own youthful ambition. The boy traced words with his finger, mouthing them softly. Sterling leaned closer, offering guidance when Ethan stumbled, and something inside him softened. He remembered the years he had once dreamed of teaching his own children to read. That dream had died with his wife, or so he thought. Later that evening, back at the house, Ethan discovered Sterling's drafting table. Sheets of vellum, sharpened pencils, and rulers lay neatly arranged. "Can I try?" the boy asked, eyes wide. Sterling hesitated. That table was his sanctum, the one place untouched by others. But Ethan's eagerness broke through his resistance. He guided the boy's small hand, showing him how to draw a straight line, how to measure angles. Ethan giggled at his crooked attempts, but Sterling found himself laughing too. For a fleeting moment, the years fell away, and he felt less like a solitary architect and more like something he had once longed to be a father. As autumn deepened, Ethan's trust in him grew. The boy no longer asked if Sterling would be there in the morning. Instead, he simply assumed it. And Sterling, to his own surprise, liked the assumption. It was as though Ethan's certainty carried enough faith for both of them. Yet late at night, when the house was quiet again, Sterling would sit by the window, staring out at the darkened street. Somewhere beyond, Marissa was keeping her distance, leaving him to raise questions she refused to answer. Why send Ethan here? Why now? And why vanish when confronted? The mystery gnawed at him, even as the boy in his care wove himself deeper into Sterling's guarded heart. October's chill sharpened as the days shortened, and with it came small rituals that Sterling had not practiced in years. He began lighting the fireplace before dinner, not for himself, but because Ethan always curled close to the warmth, his cheeks flushed in the glow. Sterling found himself buying groceries he hadn't touched in a decade: peanut butter, chocolate milk, marshmallows for hot cocoa. When the cashier commented on the change, Sterling brushed it off. But deep inside, he felt the strange thrill of being noticed not for his business acumen, but for the quiet act of caring. One Thursday evening, Dorothy invited them both over for supper. Her modest kitchen smelled of pot roast and apple pie. Ethan immediately made himself at home, chatting about school books he'd read at the library and asking Dorothy if she ever raised chickens. Sterling sat back, watching the boy's animated expressions, surprised at how easily he fit into the rhythm of another household. Dorothy caught Sterling's eye over the table and said, "Children teach us what matters, even when we've forgotten." Sterling didn't reply, but the words burrowed deep. Later, while Ethan played with Dorothy's old chess set, she leaned close to Sterling. "That boy carries a piece of you. I can see it clear as day. Don't push it away, Sterling. Don't make the mistake of thinking work will love you back." It was the kind of truth only a neighbor who had watched him for decades could say. He wanted to argue, but her tone left no room for denial. Walking home in the cool night, Ethan clutched Sterling's hand, a gesture so natural it startled him. The boy looked up and said, "When I grow up, I want to build houses like you. Big ones, but with secret hiding places." Sterling chuckled, squeezing the boy's hand. "Maybe one day, kid, maybe one day." And yet his chest ached with the knowledge that Ethan's dreams carried a weight of expectation he had never invited but was beginning to crave. The balance Sterling had created in his life felt fragile. Each evening, he lingered longer by Ethan's bedside, listening to the boy chatter before sleep. Each morning, he found himself looking forward to making breakfast. And every time Ethan called him Dad, by mistake whether in front of Dorothy, the grocer, or the diner waitress, Sterling struggled less to correct him. A sliver of pride even began to creep in, though he would never admit it aloud. But the unanswered questions returned at night. He often dreamed of Marissa, not as the woman glimpsed fleetingly on Maple Street, but as she had been years ago laughing on a summer evening, auburn hair catching the light, her hand slipping from his as circumstances pulled them apart. He would wake restless, staring at the ceiling, his mind tangled between past and present. If Ethan was truly hers, then who was he to the boy? And what did it mean that she hovered so near, yet refused to step forward? One chilly Saturday, Sterling found Ethan at the drafting table again, sketching crooked rectangles he proudly called castles. He crouched beside him, guiding the pencil. When Ethan suddenly asked, "Why don't I look like you?" Sterling froze, caught off guard. The boy shrugged quickly, as though to soften the question. "I just wonder. Mom says people see family in the eyes, but mine don't match yours." Sterling searched for words, but none came easily. "Sometimes family isn't about looking the same," he finally said. "It's about who stays." The phrase hung in the air, more confession than explanation. Ethan seemed satisfied, returning to his crooked lines. Sterling, however, felt the walls inside him shift once more. As the wind rattled the windows and leaves scattered across Maple Lane, Sterling realized he was standing at the threshold of something irreversible. He had let a boy into his home, into his days, and into corners of his heart he thought had died. Yet beyond that door, Marissa remained in shadow, holding secrets he could no longer ignore. The season was changing, and with it, Sterling's life. He could not yet name what was coming, but he knew one truth with clarity. Nothing would return to the way it had been. The first frost of November dusted Stillwater like powdered sugar, glittering across lawns and rooftops. Sterling woke earlier than usual, drawn downstairs by the muffled sounds of Ethan rummaging in the kitchen. He found the boy standing on a chair, reaching for cereal on the top shelf. "You could have asked," Sterling said, taking the box down. Ethan grinned sheepishly. "I wanted to make breakfast for us." It was only toast and cereal, but Sterling ate it as though it were a feast, humbled by the boy's effort. He realized, with a pang, that no one had made breakfast for him since his wife died. As the days shortened, their routines deepened. Sterling drove Ethan to the elementary school, feeling an odd swell of pride as the boy waved to friends before rushing inside. He waited in the carpool line each afternoon, a thermos of coffee in hand, watching other parents chat while children piled into minivans. For years he had pitied those routines as dull, but now he saw them as lifelines, the ordinary threads that wove a family together. Still, questions lingered. Marissa had not appeared again. Sterling tried to convince himself she had left town, that Ethan was his responsibility now. Yet he knew better. She was out there, watching. One evening after dinner, Ethan pulled a shoebox from his backpack. Inside lay treasures only a child would consider valuable. A pine cone, a baseball card, a small photo of Marissa. Sterling picked up the picture carefully. Marissa's smile was faint, almost shy. Her eyes seemed older, wearier than he remembered. "She said to keep it safe," Ethan murmured. Sterling studied the photo in silence. The resemblance between Ethan and Marissa was undeniable, but there was something in the boy's expression, some tilt of the brow, some stubborn set of the jaw that mirrored his own reflection in the bathroom mirror. He shoved the thought away before it could take root. To distract them both, Sterling suggested they bake cookies. The kitchen soon filled with the smell of sugar and vanilla, flour dusting the counters. Ethan laughed when Sterling spilled too much salt, and the sound loosened a knot in the man's chest. Later, they carried a plate of cookies next door to Dorothy. Dorothy listened to Ethan's chatter with delight, then turned serious. "Sterling, I've seen you these past weeks. That boy's healing something in you. Don't waste it by clinging to old fears." He brushed her words aside with a stiff smile, but inside he knew she was right. He had been living half a life, and Ethan was forcing him to face the emptiness he had accepted as normal. As Thanksgiving approached, invitations floated through town. Dorothy insisted they join her family for supper. Sterling resisted at first. He had spent the holiday alone for years, but Ethan's eager face convinced him. When the day arrived, Dorothy's table groaned with turkey, stuffing, and pies. Ethan sat between Sterling and Dorothy's grandchildren, laughing and sharing stories. Sterling found himself drawn into the warmth, his usual reserve slipping away. At one point, Ethan leaned against him, drowsy from too much pie, and Sterling felt a sensation both foreign and familiar, belonging. But as the evening wound down, he stepped outside for air. Snowflakes drifted in the street-light glow, and there across the road he saw her. Marissa stood half hidden by the church steps, watching. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, Sterling considered crossing to her. Before he could move, she turned and vanished into the falling snow. Sterling lingered on the porch long after Marissa disappeared into the snow. The laughter from Dorothy's house spilled into the night, yet he felt caught between two worlds, the warmth of the table behind him and the unresolved past that had just stared him in the face. For years, Sterling had trained himself to ignore ghosts. But Marissa wasn't a ghost. She was alive, near, and somehow still tied to him through the boy who now slept under his roof. Back home, Ethan dozed on the couch with a blanket pulled to his chin. Sterling sat beside him, brushing a hand over the boy's hair. Ethan stirred slightly, but didn't wake. The simple trust of that small gesture allowing himself to rest without fear moved Sterling more than he could admit. He whispered into the dim room, "I won't let you down," though he wasn't sure if he was promising Ethan or himself. The following days brought small but meaningful changes. Sterling found himself leaving work earlier, drawn to the simple rhythm of school pickups, homework sessions at the dining table, and evening walks down Maple Lane. He began to memorize Ethan's expressions, the way his eyes lit up when talking about baseball, the way his brow furrowed in concentration over math problems, the quick grin that surfaced when Sterling offered praise. Each detail etched itself deeper, reminding Sterling that life could be more than solitude and blueprints. Stillwater's town square prepared for the Christmas season earlier than usual, stringing lights around lampposts and setting up the tall pine tree that would soon be decorated. Ethan dragged Sterling to see it every evening, insisting it looked different under each sunset. Sterling indulged him, though part of him secretly agreed. With each visit, he found himself enjoying not just the lights, but the company, the hand that instinctively sought his, the laughter that rose easily in the cold air. Dorothy remained a steady presence. One evening, as Sterling shoveled snow from his driveway, she leaned over the fence. "You can't live in two places at once, Sterling. Either step into the life that boy offers you, or keep hiding in the shadows of the past. But don't straddle both. It'll tear you apart." Her words cut deep. He knew she was right. Yet stepping fully into Ethan's life meant confronting Marissa and the questions she had left behind. The turning point came on a Sunday morning. After church, Sterling and Ethan stopped by the diner. Gloria, the waitress, set down their usual orders: coffee for him, chocolate milk for Ethan. She winked. "Never thought I'd see the day you'd be a regular with a kid, Sterling. Looks good on you." Ethan beamed, oblivious to the weight of her comment. Sterling only nodded, but inside, he felt the shift. The town was beginning to see them as a pair. And perhaps, in a way, they were. That evening, while clearing the table, Ethan looked up suddenly. "Dad," he said, without hesitation this time. The words slipped out so naturally it took Sterling a moment to realize what had happened. The boy froze, eyes wide, waiting for correction. Sterling swallowed. He could have brushed it aside, insisted on boundaries, but instead he reached out, steadying Ethan's hand with his own. "Finish your milk," he said quietly. And that was answer enough. Later, as Sterling tucked him into bed, Ethan whispered, "You'll always be here, right?" Sterling hesitated, the image of Marissa on the church steps still haunting him. But when he looked into Ethan's expectant eyes, he answered with more conviction than he felt. "Yes, I'll be here." Snow continued to fall outside, blanketing Stillwater in silence. Inside the house, however, silence no longer felt empty. It pulsed with the fragile beginnings of something Sterling had thought lost forever. A family. The harvest fair arrived with banners strung across Stillwater's town square, and the smell of kettle corn drifting down every street. It was the highlight of autumn, drawing families from across the county with hayrides, apple pie contests, and fiddlers playing on the courthouse steps. Sterling had not attended in years. He had always claimed work or travel as an excuse, but the truth was simpler. He had no one to go with. This year was different. Ethan had begged for weeks, eyes wide with anticipation, and Sterling could not say no. They arrived in the late afternoon, when the fair was in full swing. Strings of lights twinkled overhead as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky a deep amber. Ethan tugged Sterling from booth to booth: caramel apples, pumpkin carving, rides on the hay wagon that circled the square. Sterling followed, awkward at first, but gradually finding himself laughing when Ethan's face lit up with each new discovery. Neighbors noticed. "Well, Mr. Halloway," someone called. "Never thought we'd see you here with company." Sterling only gave a curt nod, but Ethan waved cheerfully, oblivious to his guardian's discomfort. Dorothy, bustling near the pie stand, leaned close when they crossed paths. "Looks good on you, Sterling. Don't hide that smile." The boy pulled him toward a game booth where children tossed rings onto bottles. Ethan missed most of his tries, but when he finally landed one, he jumped with glee. "Did you see that?" he shouted, holding up the prize, a small stuffed bear. Sterling smiled despite himself. "I saw. Good job." The pride in his voice surprised him, warm and unforced. As evening deepened, the parade began. Floats decorated with cornstalks rolled down, Maine, high school bands marching in rhythm, children tossing candy to the crowd. Ethan perched on Sterling's shoulders, waving at everyone, his laughter carrying over the music. Sterling steadied him with both hands, marveling at how natural it felt to protect and hold him. For the first time in years, he felt part of the town's rhythm instead of an outsider watching from the edges. Then came the unexpected. As Sterling set Ethan down, the boy swayed slightly. At first he thought it was excitement, but Ethan's face had gone pale. "I don't feel good," the boy whispered. His knees buckled, and before Sterling could catch him fully, Ethan collapsed against his chest. Panic surged through Sterling. "Ethan!" he called, his voice sharper than he had ever used. People nearby turned, gasps rippling through the crowd. He scooped the boy into his arms, feeling the small body limp, the skin hot with sudden fever. Marissa appeared then, as if summoned by the moment. From the edge of the crowd, Sterling saw her auburn hair and wide, stricken eyes. She stepped forward, hands trembling, but halted when she met Sterling's glare. For an instant, all the years between them vanished, the youth they had shared, the silence that followed, the boy now lying between them. Then she turned, as if unable to face it, vanishing again into the crush of people. "Somebody call the clinic," Sterling barked, his voice breaking. The crowd parted as he carried Ethan through, his heart pounding louder than the marching drums still echoing behind them. Sterling's long strides carried him across the square, the boy cradled against his chest. The music of the parade faded into a blur, replaced by the thudding of his own heartbeat. He remembered the small clinic just a block away and made for it, ignoring curious glances and murmured whispers. Ethan's head lolled on his shoulder, hot against his neck, each shallow breath sharpening the fear clawing through him. Inside, the nurse on duty rushed forward. "Set him here," she instructed, guiding Sterling to an exam table. Sterling obeyed, though his hands shook as he laid Ethan down. The boy stirred weakly, eyes half opening. "Don't leave me," he whispered. The words pierced Sterling deeper than any accusation ever could. The nurse checked his vitals. "Fever spiking. Could be flu, could be exhaustion. We'll need to keep him under observation." She looked at Sterling. "Are you his father?" The question was practical, routine, yet Sterling felt it slam into him like a verdict. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Finally he said, "I'm responsible for him." It was the closest truth he could manage. Hours stretched in the small exam room. Sterling sat by Ethan's side, his coat draped over the boy like a blanket. He thought of the countless nights he had worked late at his office, poring over plans that seemed so vital at the time. Tonight, none of it mattered. The only blueprint he longed to hold together was lying feverish on the table before him. At one point, Dorothy slipped into the room, having followed from the fair. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Children fall sick, Sterling. But you," she nodded at Ethan, "you're the one who has to decide if you'll stand in the gap. Don't let fear drive you away this time." Her eyes, kind yet piercing, left no space for denial. Near midnight, Ethan's fever began to ease. The nurse assured them he would recover with rest. Sterling exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, brushing damp hair from the boy's forehead. Relief swept through him, mingled with something heavier, an awareness of how close he had come to losing a child he hadn't even known he wanted. When the nurse finally allowed them to leave, Sterling carried Ethan back through the quiet streets. The fair was long over, only scraps of paper cups and popcorn bags littering the sidewalks. The town lay hushed under the stars. He adjusted the boy gently in his arms, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing against his chest. But the image that would not leave his mind was Marissa's face in the crowd, eyes wide, with something between fear and longing, vanishing before he could demand answers. Her absence now burned sharper than her presence. She had left Ethan on his doorstep, then fled when the boy collapsed. Why? And what truth was she still hiding? As Sterling stepped onto his porch, he paused, looking down at Ethan. The boy's lips parted in sleep, whispering the word again. "Dad." It was faint, but it rooted itself deep. A word Sterling could neither claim fully nor push away. He carried Ethan inside, laying him carefully on the couch, and sat beside him until the first streaks of dawn appeared beyond the window. His body ached with fatigue, but his mind would not rest. One fact had become clear. His life was no longer his own. Sterling Holloway, a man who had built his world on blueprints and solitude, now faced the one structure he had never designed but could no longer deny a family. The night after the harvest fair, Sterling barely slept. Ethan had dozed fitfully on the couch, his small frame burning with fever, while Sterling sat nearby, refreshing cool cloths and checking his breathing every few minutes. The house, usually so quiet, was filled with the faint creak of floorboards as Sterling paced between the kitchen and living room, unwilling to let the boy out of sight. Morning brought a thin light through the curtains, but no relief. Ethan's cheeks were flushed, his voice weak as he whispered, "I don't want to go back to sleep. I keep dreaming you'll be gone." Sterling knelt beside him, gripping the boy's hand. "I'm not going anywhere," he said firmly, though fear gnawed at the edges of his voice. He called Dorothy, who arrived within minutes with a basket of remedies. "Children get sick fast, but they heal fast too," she assured him, checking Ethan's forehead with a practiced hand. She brewed tea with honey and herbs, humming an old hymn as if the sound itself might ease Sterling's worry. "You've got to keep steady, Sterling. He needs calm as much as medicine." Sterling tried to follow her advice, but his mind was a storm. He had faced clients worth millions, projects that spanned city blocks, crises that demanded instant decisions. Yet nothing had prepared him for the terror of watching this child slip in and out of restless sleep under his care. That evening, as the wind rattled the windows and rain tapped against the panes, a knock sounded at the back door. Sterling opened it to find Marissa standing in the shadows, soaked from the storm. Her eyes, weary and red-rimmed, searched past him toward the living room. "I had to see him," she whispered. Sterling's jaw tightened. "You should have come sooner." She stepped inside, wringing her hands. When Ethan stirred at the sound of her voice, she hurried to the couch, kneeling at his side. "Baby, I'm here," she murmured, brushing damp hair from his forehead. Ethan blinked weakly, whispering, "Mom?" before drifting back into sleep. Sterling watched, torn between anger and relief. For weeks she had hovered on the edges, appearing only long enough to vanish again. Now, with the boy ill, she had finally crossed the threshold. When Marissa rose, Sterling confronted her. "Why did you leave him with me? Why disappear when he collapsed?" His voice was low but seething. Her shoulders sagged. "Because I didn't know how else to keep him safe. I couldn't give him what he needed." She swallowed hard, her voice cracking. "But you could." The admission stopped Sterling cold. "Safe from what?" he demanded. Marissa shook her head, tears glinting in the lamplight. "Not now. Please, just let me stay tonight. He needs both of us." For a long moment, Sterling considered sending her away, the fury in him burning hotter than the fire in the hearth. But when Ethan coughed in his sleep, Sterling relented. "Fine. Stay. But tomorrow we talk." Marissa nodded, sinking into the chair beside the couch. As the storm howled outside, the three of them remained in silence, an unfinished family caught in the fragile balance of fear, secrets, and a boy's fragile breaths. The storm raged through the night, rattling shutters and bending the bare trees against the wind. Inside, the house glowed dimly from the fire, shadows flickering across the walls. Sterling sat rigid in the armchair, watching Marissa hover over Ethan with a tenderness that stirred something he couldn't quite name. When Ethan finally slipped into steadier sleep, Sterling broke the silence. "You owe me the truth." Marissa's hand stilled on the blanket. For a long time, she stared at the boy's sleeping face, as if drawing strength from it. Then, in a voice low and unsteady, she began. "When I left Stillwater all those years ago, I thought I was doing the right thing. I had nothing, no money, no family to lean on. I thought you had moved on," she swallowed. "When I realized I was pregnant, I was terrified. I told myself I'd spare you the burden that I could manage on my own, but I was wrong." Sterling's jaw tightened, his knuckles white against the armrest. "You should have told me." Tears welled in her eyes. "I know. And every day since, I've carried that mistake. I tried to give Ethan a stable life, but things kept unraveling. Jobs slipped through my hands, bills piled up. I thought, maybe you could give him the life I couldn't. So I brought him here. And then, when I saw how quickly he trusted you, how natural it looked, I panicked. I didn't know if you'd reject him, or me, all over again." Her words hung heavy in the room. Sterling felt anger, grief, and something else he couldn't untangle. The years lost, the lies told, the boy who had grown up without him, it all pressed down at once. "You vanished when he needed you most," Sterling said harshly. Marissa flinched. "I know, and I can't undo it, but I'm here now. If you'll let me, I want to be part of his life again, even if that means standing in the background." The fire crackled between them, filling the silence. Sterling turned toward Ethan, who shifted in his sleep. A faint sound, escaping his lips. At first, Sterling thought it was a dream's murmur, but then the word became clear, fragile yet piercing. "Don't leave me, Dad." The room stilled. Sterling's breath caught, his chest tightening as though the boy's plea had reached into the deepest cracks of his soul. He leaned closer, brushing Ethan's hair back, whispering, "I'm not leaving." Marissa's eyes filled with tears at the sight, but Sterling barely noticed. His world, once made of blueprints and solitude, was rearranging itself around the fragile weight of that single word. As the storm outside began to ease, a new storm took root inside Sterling. The reckoning of lost years, of choices made and unmade, and the undeniable truth whispered by a sick child in the dark. By the time dawn broke pale over Stillwater, Sterling knew that nothing could return to what it had been. The morning after the storm arrived quiet, the snow softened into patches of slush along the Stillwater streets. Sterling brewed coffee in the kitchen, its aroma carrying through the house, but his thoughts remained tangled. The word Ethan had murmured in his sleep, Dad still echoed inside him. Marissa moved about the kitchen silently, her eyes red from the night before. She seemed both present and absent, lingering in her own thoughts. When Ethan woke and wandered in, Sterling noticed the boy clutch something in his small fist. "What do you have there, champ?" Sterling asked gently. Ethan opened his hand to reveal a tarnished brass key, the kind that looked far older than the house's modern locks. "I found it under the rug upstairs," he said with a shy smile. "It looks like it belongs to a treasure chest." Sterling turned the key over in his palm. It bore a delicate etching, almost like an initial, though worn by time. Something about it nagged at his memory. Marissa froze when she saw it, her color draining. Sterling caught her reaction immediately. "You know something," he said, his tone more observation than question. Marissa hesitated, then whispered, "It looks like one of the keys to your parents' old cedar chest. Didn't they keep it in the attic?" The attic. Sterling hadn't stepped into that dusty space in years. The thought of sifting through his late parents' belongings always felt like tearing open a wound best left closed. But now, with the key warm in his palm, he felt a tug deeper than reluctance it was necessity. "Ethan," Sterling said softly, "want to go on a little adventure? The attic holds some old family history. Maybe even the kind of treasure you're imagining." The boy's eyes lit with excitement. "Really? Can I bring my flashlight?" Sterling smiled faintly. "Of course." Together they climbed the narrow stairs, Marissa trailing behind, her steps uncertain. The attic smelled of cedar and thyme, boxes stacked like forgotten chapters waiting to be reopened. Dust motes swirled in the thin winter light, filtering through a small round window. "There," Sterling said, pointing to a heavy cedar chest tucked against the far wall. Its brass latch glinted faintly, just the right size for the key. Ethan hurried forward, his small hands fumbling to fit the key into place. The lock clicked open with surprising ease, a sound that seemed louder than the storm had been. The lid creaked as Sterling lifted it, revealing a collection of items neatly folded inside. Quilts, letters tied with faded ribbon, family photographs in worn leather albums. Ethan gasped as though he truly had found treasure. He pulled out a photograph, brushing off dust. "Who's this?" he asked, handing it to Sterling. Sterling's breath caught. The picture showed him in his 20s, smiling awkwardly with Marissa by his side, her hand resting protectively over a barely noticeable curve of her belly. His parents stood behind them, their faces proud, as though the moment had been meant to mark the beginning of a new family. The air in the attic grew heavy. Marissa covered her mouth with trembling fingers. Ethan looked between them innocently. "Why are you both in this picture together? And why does Mom look like she was carrying me?" The question pierced through Sterling like lightning. The denial he had clung to, the confusion of the past weeks, all dissolved into a painful clarity. Marissa whispered, her voice breaking, "They knew. Your parents knew. About Ethan." Sterling stared at the photo, his throat tight. The weight of lost years pressed down harder than the cedar lid ever could. Sterling's hands trembled as he held the photograph closer. The smile on his younger face, the way Marissa's hand rested protectively over her belly, the proud look in his parents' eyes, it was undeniable. A truth he had buried under years of busyness and denial now stared back at him from fading ink. "Tell me," he said quietly, though his voice carried the weight of command. "Tell me everything." Marissa sank onto a dusty trunk, her shoulders slumped. "We were so young, Sterling. I thought I could handle it alone. You were consumed by your projects, by ambition. I was afraid to tell you, afraid you'd see me as an obstacle. So I left." Her eyes glistened as she met his. "But your parents knew. They guessed before I even said a word. That's why they took this picture. They wanted you to have proof one day, in case I couldn't stay." Sterling's heart pounded against his ribs. All the sharp edges of his life, the long hours, the empty house, the walls he had built suddenly felt brittle, ready to crack. "And Ethan?" His throat caught. "He's my son?" Marissa nodded, tears spilling freely. "Yes, I should have told you long ago. Every day I didn't, the guilt grew heavier. But when I saw how quickly he connected with you, I knew it was because blood recognizes blood." The words landed like thunder. Sterling turned to Ethan, who sat cross-legged on the floor, clutching the flashlight like a talisman. The boy's gaze darted between them, confusion shadowing his innocence. "What does that mean?" Ethan asked softly. Sterling knelt before him, taking both small hands in his. His voice shook but remained steady enough for Ethan to understand. "It means I'm not just someone taking care of you, son. I'm your father." For a moment, the attic seemed to hold its breath. Ethan blinked, his mouth parting as though trying to measure the truth against all the nights he had secretly wished for it. Then, without hesitation, he launched forward, burying his face against Sterling's chest. "I knew it," the boy whispered fiercely. "I just knew." Sterling's arms closed around him, strong and trembling at once. Years of solitude collapsed into that single embrace. The air smelled of cedar and dust, but to Sterling, it was the sweetest scent he had ever known. Marissa sobbed softly in the background, her hands pressed over her mouth. Sterling looked up at her, his eyes raw with both accusation and something else understanding. "You should have trusted me," he said, but there was no venom left in his tone, only weary truth. "I was wrong," Marissa admitted, her voice ragged. "I was so afraid. But you deserve him. He deserves you." Ethan pulled back just enough to look at Sterling, his small face serious. "So, does this mean we're a family now?" Sterling felt the question reverberate in the hollow spaces of his heart. He cupped the boy's face, brushing away a tear that had spilled from those wide, hopeful eyes. "Yes, son. From now on, we're a family." The photograph slipped from Sterling's hand onto the attic floor, the image of their younger selves staring up, bearing silent witness to a truth finally spoken aloud. But as the weight of revelation settled, so did another feeling uncertainty. Sterling knew the past couldn't be erased with a single embrace. Trust had been broken, years had been lost, and forgiveness would not come easily. Yet in Ethan's fierce grip around his neck, he felt the undeniable pull of responsibility, of love, of second chances. As they left the attic together, Ethan's hand in his, Sterling glanced back one last time at the cedar chest. It no longer looked like a box of forgotten memories. It looked like a vault of redemption, a reminder that the past, though painful, could give birth to a new future. Downstairs, as the late morning light spilled through the windows, Sterling's steps felt heavier and lighter all at once. The truth was out, and there was no going back. The real question remained. Could he, a man who had spent decades building walls, truly learn how to build a family? Winter slowly loosened its grip on Stillwater. By mid-February, the snowbanks along Maple Street had shrunk to muddy heaps, and the church bells, once muffled by storms, rang clear again across the town square. Life outside seemed to move forward, yet inside Sterling's house, change carried a deeper weight. The days after the attic discovery unfolded like fragile steps across new ground. Sterling found himself watching Ethan with a different kind of awe. Every laugh, every question, every stubborn streak now carried the undeniable truth. This was his son. The boy he had unknowingly longed for during years of lonely dinners and silent mornings. Still, the past lingered like a shadow. At breakfast one morning, Sterling slid a plate of pancakes toward Ethan. The boy grinned, drowning them in syrup, then looked up innocently. "Dad, do you think you could come watch my school project next week?" Sterling's chest tightened at the word dad. He wanted to say yes immediately, but his old habits tugged at him: meetings, deadlines, investors. For a moment he hesitated, and Ethan's smile faltered. "I'll be there," Sterling said firmly, setting down his coffee. "No matter what." The boy's face lit up, and Sterling felt something break free inside. As if a chain he hadn't realized bound him had snapped loose. Marissa, sitting quietly across the table, noticed the change. She'd been giving Sterling space, wary of pushing too hard after years of silence and secrets. But that morning, she spoke softly. He's always wanted someone to show up for him. Not gifts, not promises, just presence. Sterling met haar Hase. For once, there was no anger, only an unspoken acknowledgement of the road still ahead. Later that week, Sterling drove Ethan to school in his old Ford, its heater humming against the chill. Ethan clutched a shoebox project on the solar system, crafted with foil planets and cotton clouds. Sterling remembered how he once measured success in skyscrapers and contracts. Now, he realized, his son's proud smile as he presented Saturn's rings to a classroom of third graders felt like the greatest achievement of his life. That evening, Marissa found Sterling sitting on the porch steps, staring at the fading sunset. "You look different in there today," she said. He chuckled dryly. Terrified. "My son knows more about Jupiter than I ever will," she smiled, easing down beside him. "You showed up. That's what matters." "Oh." The words settled between them like balm on an old wound. Sterling glanced at her, the woman who had once vanished from his life, yet returned, carrying the truth of his bloodline. Trust wasn't rebuilt in a day, but something undeniable tethered them now. Ethan. Inside, the boy's laughter floated through the open window as he played with toy rockets on the living room rug. The sound carried through the cool evening, striking Sterling with the realization this was what home was supposed to feel like. But the journey wasn't complete. The community still whispered, and the weight of years lost pressed heavy. To truly embrace this second chance, Sterling knew he would need to step beyond his own walls and claim Ethan publicly, without shame or hesitation. That night, as the church bells marked 9 o'clock, Sterling looked at Marissa and said quietly, "It's time everyone knows he's mine." Sterling's words, "It's time everyone knows he's mine," set the tone for the weeks that followed. No longer hiding behind the privacy of his house, he began to step out into Stillwater with Ethan by his side. At the diner, where farmers and retirees gathered for coffee, Sterling introduced the boy proudly. "This is my son, Ethan," he said, shaking hands, ignoring the curious glances. The murmurs faded quickly under the boy's wide smile and Sterling's steady gaze. On Sundays, they sat together in the wooden pews of the town's small church, sunlight pouring through stained glass onto Ethan's tousled hair. When the choir sang, Sterling felt the words differently now, no longer hymns about other people's lives, but echoes of his own redemption. Folks who had once seen him as distant and untouchable now nodded warmly, recognizing a man who had softened under the weight of love. The greatest test came at a community supper in the church hall. Folding tables were lined with casseroles, pies, and steaming trays of chili. Sterling stood up before the crowd, his voice carrying over the hum of conversation. "Most of you have known me as the man who built houses in this town," he began. "But tonight, I want you to know me as something else, Ethan's father. I made mistakes. I lost years. I can never get back. But God gave me a second chance, and I intend to spend the rest of my life making good on it." Marissa sat at a nearby table, her eyes wet, while Ethan grinned with the unguarded joy only a child could hold. Applause filled the hall, not thunderous, but warm, like a quilt laid across weary shoulders. Sterling exhaled, feeling lighter than he had in decades. Spring arrived, and with it a quiet peace. Sterling found himself rearranging his work schedule, trading late-night calls for evenings spent helping Ethan with homework. He learned the names of Ethan's classmates, attended school plays, and discovered the rhythm of fatherhood not in grand gestures, but in the ordinary. Pancakes on Saturday mornings, bedtime stories on tired weeknights, laughter spilling from the backyard at dusk. One evening, as twilight deepened, Ethan tugged at his sleeve. "Dad, can we plant something in the garden? Like a tree? So it grows while we do." Sterling's throat tightened. Together they dug a small hole behind the porch, planting a young maple sapling. As they patted down the soil, Ethan pressed his small handprint into the dirt, leaving a mark beside Sterling's larger one. "Now it knows we're a team," the boy said. Marissa watched from the steps, her face soft with hope. For the first time in years, She allowed herself to believe that the past, though painful, could be healed by the present. Later that night, Sterling tucked Ethan into bed. The boy yawned, already drifting toward sleep. "Promise you'll still be here tomorrow?" he murmured. Sterling brushed his hair gently. "I promise, son. I'm not going anywhere." He stepped out into the hallway where Marissa waited, holding the old attic photograph. She handed it to him with a tentative smile. "We can't erase the mistakes, Sterling, but maybe we can honor them by building something better." He took her hand, the picture trembling between their palms. "That's exactly what we'll do. For him. For us." In the quiet that followed, Sterling felt the house breathe differently, less like a monument to solitude, more like a living, beating home. The maple tree swayed gently in the night wind outside, its roots already claiming the earth, promising years of shade and strength to come. For a man who once measured life in blueprints and contracts, Sterling now understood the truest legacy was not built of wood or stone. It was built of love, forgiveness, and the unshakable bond of family. And as he turned off the lights, the words echoed through him once more. "We're a family. For good this time." In the quiet after all the storms had passed, what remained was not the echo of harsh words or the weight of lost years, but the steady rhythm of a boy's laughter inside a house that had once known only silence. Sterling, Marissa, and young Ethan had walked through shadows of regret and fear. Yet, they had found their way back into the light together. For an old home in Stillwater, the greatest renovation was not measured in lumber or brick, but in love reclaimed and trust rebuilt. When we pause to reflect on this journey, it's not the grand gestures that linger, it's the small ones. A promise kept at a school project, a simple meal shared at the family table, a maple sapling planted in the backyard, its roots carrying the weight of new beginnings. These are the things that teach us, as gently as an old hymn carried by a church bell, that second chances are real, and that family, no matter how fractured, can be pieced back together. The lesson is clear. Love has the power to redeem the deepest wounds. Forgiveness, though hard to give, frees us from chains of the past. A man who once measured worth in blueprints and bank accounts discovered that true wealth lives in the smile of a child calling him Dad. And for Marissa, once burdened by guilt, the act of confessing brought not only healing but also the chance to stand as a mother without fear. Together, they proved that kindness and courage, those quiet, everyday acts, can change the course of a life. For us listening today, perhaps the story feels familiar. Maybe it reminds you of a family dinner where old quarrels were finally laid to rest, or a long-lost phone call that reopened a bond thought gone forever. In towns across America, from small porches in the Midwest to coastal cottages bathed in salt air, elders have long carried the truth that happiness is not found in trophies or titles, but in belonging. Like the warm smell of cornbread pulled from the oven on a Sunday afternoon, it is the simple presence of those we love that makes life rich. So let us take this to heart. Love, when given freely, can change destiny. Everyone deserves a place at the table, no matter their past. Money and power may build tall walls, but only compassion builds a home. Sometimes the greatest light shines when we choose to live not for ourselves, but for those who depend on us. Like a lantern placed in the window on a dark night, a single act of forgiveness can guide a wandering soul safely home. We all know this truth deep inside. Family is the shelter we return to when the world grows cold. And when we open that door, even after years of silence, we find warmth waiting. As you sit tonight, maybe with a cup of tea or by a fire's glow, think about the people in your own life who might be waiting for a second chance. It is never too late to offer it. If this story touched you, leave a little sign in the comments. Press 1 if it warmed your heart, or 0 if you'd like to share your thoughts for us to grow together. And as we close, remember this. The strongest families are not those without scars, but those who choose to heal together.